former presidential candidate RFK Jr. is calling for an American journalist who was detained while reporting in Israel to be freed. Now, RFK Jr. wrote, quote, "My commitment to Israel's security and survival is absolute, so is my dedication to press freedom. That is why I am calling for the freedom of American journalist Jeremy Loffredo, who was detained while reporting in Israel. Having worked with Jeremy at Children's Health Defense, I know him as a tenacious and professional young reporter. I urge the U.S. State Department to work for his immediate return home." Now, for context, Jeremy Loffredo was one of 5 journalists reportedly detained by Israel's Defense Forces on October 9th. He is allegedly charged with endangering national security and aiding and sharing information with the enemy because of his reporting on Iranian strikes. It's a serious crime that carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment or even death, according to The Intercept. Loffredo has been released from custody, but he's been ordered to remain in the country until October 20th, allowing investigators more time to build their case.
In other freedom of speech news, Columbia University has temporarily barred a pro-Israel professor from campus. The school says the professor, Shay Davidai, repeatedly intimidated and harassed fellow employees. Davidai has accused Columbia of not doing enough to crack down on pro-Palestinian protests, which he calls anti-Semitic, according to the New York Times. Plus, recently Davidai has accused student groups of supporting terrorism. He did that in postings on X. He also posted the name and email of a Columbia professor, suggesting that professor was, quote, okay with rape, murder, torture and kidnapping, end quote. Davidai was temporarily restricted from campus once before. That was back in April, after he planned to go to a pro-Palestinian protest and shout the names of hostages held by Hamas.
Well, let's start with this situation in Israel. I'm glad RFK Jr. is speaking out about this. RFK Jr. is very supportive of Israel. I know that actually frustrated some of his former friends and allies on the left. He sparred with Brianna Joy Gray on this show about it numerous times. But however, he is committed to freedom of speech, and I think is correct to point out that this is an appalling case. It is a freedom of speech, freedom of the press issue. This is our ally. This is a country who often it is made the case that one of the reasons to support Israel is because it is a Western-style democracy that defends Enlightenment values. So it must live up to those, including freedom of speech, journalism, etc. So I think this is utterly contemptible that they're building this case. And again, the administration, he's a U.S. citizen, Biden, Harris, Trump, whoever's going to be our next president, should actually do something about this.
So firstly, on the RFK Jr. question, I mean, I have been critical of him at other times, so I want to tip my hat to him on this one, because he's doing something that I think is pretty important generally in our political culture, which is defending the right of someone with whom he disagrees quite strongly on the position or the issue under consideration, which is Israel and its conduct of its operations in Gaza and elsewhere. So I think due credit to him for doing that. The specifics of the case would be a little too complicated to go into, but Kennedy is really standing up for the principle of press freedom there, and I think that's very admirable. The Columbia case I view very, very differently, because I don't think that the professor who has been barred there really applies the principles that he purports to believe in universally at all. As we noted in the introduction, he has tried to get student groups suspended or extend their suspensions. He has called people, I mean, he's basically defamed people in my book, calling, for example, a very respected scholar of that issue at Columbia, pro-Hamas, of which there's no evidence to at all. So I find him, or I put him, in a very different category to the situation that RFK Jr. is drawing attention to.
Yeah, look, I think this guy, David, I think his antics are certainly over the line, and he's just knee-jerk calling everyone terrorist supporter. I don't think he's doing himself a lot of, or he's demonstrating that he has a lot of credibility by wielding that accusation so widely. That said, he should have a free speech right to do that. If he's defaming people, you have the legal procedures to deal with that. The idea that he's harassing his coworkers, this does start to get into a tricky middle ground, because a Columbia University as a workplace, if you were constantly barraging some colleague with inappropriate or harassing emails or messages, as a workplace, it could do something without, I would argue, violating necessarily free speech issues. But if it's just he's posting really aggressive criticism, maybe wrong criticism or mean criticism of them on social media, then I don't think it really crosses into that line to bar him from campus. Well, he can actually still talk about it on social media. So that doesn't even, I mean, the main problem is that he keeps saying really not kind and nutty things about people on social media. Barring him from campus doesn't even accomplish that. If the barring him from campus is because he's been getting in people's faces, again, at some point, this is a sort of behavior that even non-ideologically, I do think a university can take some steps to deter or prevent. I don't know what steps they've taken up until now. I would like to know more about that. Did you try to speak to him about conduct unbecoming of a professor, that sort of thing? And is there a double standard being applied? Because I'm sure many pro-Israel people, if they're watching or listening, will say, well, what about XYZ, Gaza supporting student or professor who's been out there waving banners in people's faces or saying things that, and again, I'm not describing this entirely as the response to people protesting on Gaza's behalf, but we have seen signs that are supportive not just of the Palestinians but of Hamas and of the events of October 7th. So are these things being dealt with in the same way? So it is a little bit messy and complicated, I would say.
It is. I mean, I think there is an important distinction, excuse me, for a start, between freedom of speech and workplace conduct. The professor isn't the only person who has rights here. Columbia University as an employer has rights. People have a right as students at that university or as employees of that university to be free from harassment. The suggestion is that he followed at least two members of two employees, I guess, or administrators at Columbia around filming them and berating them and then posted those clips. And, I couldn't do that to anybody who works at the Hill or on Rising, and rightly so. That would be, I think, crossing the line into harassment. The other point about double standards, Robby, and this is where I really have kind of issues with this guy. He, at one stage, encouraged people to sign an email or to send a pro forma email about to try to extend the suspension of pro-Palestinian groups. And his argument in part was that the phrase "from the river to the sea" was sufficient to have those people suspended because it places, as he put it, Jewish students in danger, or as that email put it. Now, to me, you can argue about the phrase "from the river to the sea," but he is arguing that the free speech rights of protesters that he doesn't agree with should be undercut or suppressed or whatever, while he takes for himself the most expansive interpretation of free speech rights possible. And that's where I have the main problem.
I don't agree with his attitude on free speech. I think those people do deserve, I've defended the rights of the largest campus pro-Palestinian groups, even ones that have, in my view, more definitively and explicitly endorsed or shown sympathy for the actions of October 7th. I think even if you've done that, your group should not be banned from campus or anything of that nature. But I would say that free speech is even for people who are not, extending it to others. So I would say that I am unconvinced that his conduct rises, while maybe very obnoxious and wrongheaded and probably not consistent with my views of the conflict at all, I'm not at all persuaded that his actions are sufficiently over the line in a kind of workplace safety way where he should be barred from campus. But I'd be interested to hear what more, expert people like my friends at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, who cover a lot of free speech cases and have defend pro-Israel people and pro-Palestine people, I'd be interested to see what they say about this specific case. So we might follow up on that at a later date. For now, coming up next, what happens when the FBI unexpectedly knocks on your door? You might be Ken Klippenstein. We're going to interview him next.